you can only see your own struggles.
Right.
And along the way, I've been able to use my personal experiences as a catalyst to advance in this work in a way that I feel has resonated with others, including other men. And along the way, I've also perceived firsthand what many are calling the crisis in male mental health. And the public health approach is rather than treating individuals for whatever infirmity or ailment they're experiencing, figuring out what's causing it to begin with.
Right.
Right. And I don't think you need to have a clinical background or a healthcare background to have a sense that there is something wrong right now in our society.
We're all struggling.
Yes, with the men and boys in our society. And but if you did look at the numbers, you might come to agree with the position of many, including Psychology Today, that we are indeed in the midst of a male mental health crisis.
Hi there, thank you for joining us for Communities Connected podcast. This is a place for conversations with real people doing real life together. I'm your host, Jason Hopcus, the founder of the Connection Project and president and CEO of NAMI Arapahoe Douglas Counties. Today we want to focus on one of our dynamic panelists for the Man Map event, Jason Vitello. He is a behavioral health coordinator at Denver Public Health, a facilitator for the Family Leadership Training Institute in Denver 5 Points. He is an adjunct professor and member of the Advisory Council on Racial Diversity at the University of Denver Graduate School of Social Work. Jason is also a national speaker on social justice, health equity, adversity, resilience, father engagement, and male mental health. And finally, prior to his career in public health, he was a social worker and therapist who provided advocacy, mentorship, case management, and clinical services to specialized and general populations. Welcome, Jason. That's quite a list of accomplishments there. I'm glad to have you here today.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. So tell us, how did you start in this work?
So as you stated in my bio there, I'm presently a public health professional, behavioral health coordinator. My role is to improve the health of all Coloradoans by bolstering and supporting their mental health. And a primary focus of mine in that work has been male mental health. And as you noted, prior to being a public health professional, I spent close to 10 years working extensively, not exclusively, but extensively with men and male youth, from juvenile, probationers, foster youth, men in recovery, veterans, non-custodial fathers, and so on. And I also like to point out that before I was a professional helper in any capacity, I was a young man, needed some help himself. Okay. In my youth, I made, as many of us do, some poor decisions. I've had quite a few experiences with violence on both ends of the equation. I was a father as a teenager and a single father at the age of 21. And luckily there were people along the way who were there to support and help me, and in turn I committed myself to becoming a helper as well. And years ago I did not have a sophisticated understanding of what that might look like, and essentially just set out to be more than an angry man in a bar, right, which sometimes I still am.
I can relate to that. So it sounds like your own personal story is what really put you on the path to doing this work, which is admirable. I think that's really awesome, and glad that we can focus on that today. So were there some key elements that in the beginning really sort of set the stage for you doing this work? I mean, obviously you've gotten the professional credentials to do this work. Are there some things that you can share about, kind of pivot points that really made a difference in doing this?
Yeah, definitely. So being a direct service provider, whether I was a social worker, a therapist, or a case manager, and it's a common metaphor, but it often felt very much like I was in a lifeboat and in the middle of a raging storm or a flood, and every day I'm pulling people out of the swirling depths, trying to pilot them to the safety of shore, only to turn around at the end of the day to find that there are thousands more in their place, right, which, begged the question, who is upstream building dams to keep the waters back, and individuals and families and entire communities from being underwater to begin with. Additionally, I worked with countless individuals and families who had nothing inherently wrong with them. In fact, they were among the most resourceful, resilient, dynamic, intelligent people you'd ever meet. And they were simply reacting to and coping with trauma and unjust systems. And my job was not to change these systems to make them more just, but to help them do a better job with that coping. I was to help them beat the odds rather than change the odds. And it also occurred to me that there are many powerful entities that do not wish to see those systems fooled with at all.
Right.
And that's not something that we talk about very much in the work, right? For instance, we have big pharmaceutical companies that do not want us to shift from a disease-based to a whole person upstream prevention model of health.
Correct.
Oil companies or automotive industry that doesn't want us to construct walkable communities or find alternate fuel sources. Food companies that hire chemists who put chemical additives in food, bad food, to make it more addictive. Big tobacco companies that want you to keep smoking and your kids to start. I don't know who your sponsors are. I hope you're not getting in trouble there, but it occurred to me that we have our work cut out for us.
Right.
And there are these powerful entities that don't want us to see the changes that we are wishing to see in the work that we do. And that ultimately facilitated my move upstream. And it's just, you know, when you're dealing with your own struggles, you can only see your own struggles.
Right.
And along the way, I've been able to use my personal experiences as a catalyst to advance in this work in a way that I feel has resonated with others, including other men. And along the way, I've also perceived firsthand what many are calling the crisis in male mental health. And, you know, the public health approach is rather than treating individuals for whatever infirmity or ailment they're experiencing, figuring out what's causing it to begin with.
Right.
Right. And I don't think you need to have a clinical background or a healthcare background to have a sense that there's something wrong right now in our society.
We're all struggling.
Yes, with the men and boys in our society. And but if you did look at the numbers, you might come to agree with the position of many, including Psychology Today, that we are indeed in the midst of a male mental health crisis. And
Yeah, so let's talk about that crisis for a minute. Like when you know, I love the idea of the upstream work that you're talking about, which is, you know, speaks to the work that I want to do. When we look at this as a crisis, what does that mean?
So it's a crisis that starts very early in life, where you have 75% of all expulsions, suspensions, disciplinary referrals, instances of violent behavior, both victims and those punished for violent behavior, are boys.
Okay.
Men are twice as likely to die of a drug overdose. They're more than twice as likely to become addicted to substances to begin with, including alcohol. They account for about 75% of the chronically homeless, and 80% of all completed suicides are by men.
Wow.
That's about 510,000 men a year killing themselves globally, 1 man per minute. Also, men account for 80% of all those arrested for violent crimes and 93% of all prisoners in the United States. And I don't know that it gets the attention that it deserves from a social context.
When you put it in that framework, I mean, the statistics are staggering. I mean, literally, we are all struggling. So what do you think the jumping off point is? Obviously, the work you do is focused on this. How do we get better? You know, how do we help people who are struggling better connect to themselves and others?
So there are many barriers that keep men from, first of all, being connected to themselves, let alone to one another, and to their communities. And I'll talk about some of those,
Okay.
what I perceive to be barriers. One is we lack emotional fluency as men. We don't, most of us, early in life, we don't learn how to express or experience uncomfortable emotions. I don't believe in good feelings and bad feelings. We have feelings that are comfortable and feelings that are uncomfortable. And, from a very early age, boys are told to man up in the face of any kind of emotional adversity. We are told to stop crying before we are given something to cry about. And as a result, we learn to suppress our uncomfortable emotions and to push them down until they come up in ways that can be harmful to ourselves and to others. And we also learn to distract through activities or substances.
Right.
And a lot of that is again, that male socialization. And we also have what are called, what Dan Griffin from Griffin Recovery Enterprises calls the man rules.
Mm-hmm.
And he says if you walk into any room, while there may be cultural variations, and you ask what are the man rules, you'll get a list that's very similar, right? And we all know what those rules are.
Right.
Don't be weak, don't be vulnerable, don't show emotion. There's also positive rules, right? Like be
Which is
strong,
really don't be
a
authentic.
provider. Right, yeah.
Because we all feel those whether we show them or not.
Right. But then when you look at the rules of successful treatment and recovery, those are ask for help, be vulnerable, be weak, admit to powerlessness, or the rules of successful relationships or healthy relationships, be open, communicate, don't try to control, trust, and so on. So we have all these rules that are in stark contradiction to the rules that we internalize as men, these rules which keep us safe. And that's what the man rules are about. They're about safety. First of all, safety from one another, because masculinity itself is precarious. It's very hard to gain and very easy to lose. From a very, very early age, we are policing each other.
Right.
Policing our masculinity. I also want to mention that when we talk about male mental health, oftentimes we put the onus squarely on the shoulders of men. Hey, you need to be more open about your mental health challenges. You need to do a better job talking about your mental distress. We talk about how men are stubbornly stoic and self-destructively silent. And all of that conveniently ignores a lot of the social factors which perpetuate mental health challenges to begin with, that need to be addressed.
And the fact that we weren't wired to do any of those things, most of us, from the beginning. It's learned behavior.
Truly. And, a lot of research is showing and demonstrating that mental illness is perpetuated more by social conditions and social factors than was previously believed. And that's why you see higher rates of opioid addiction and depression and suicide and domestic violence in places where you have low employment rates and declines in industry. So again, it's what is our societal response to this? It's not just men man-upping their way
Right.
out of their mental health problems. Like, we like to say it takes a village to raise a healthy child, but how are our villages going to be healthy if the men are not well? And it also goes to, I think, a lot of the conceptualizations of masculinity itself. And throughout the social and political discourse right now, there's all kinds of talk about toxic masculinity.
Right.
And that is a very polarizing
Certainly
term.
a buzzword these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of men hear it as an attack on men themselves and as on masculinity itself. And that's not what I'm talking about. I actually do believe that there are positive traits and tenets associated with traditional masculinity, like courage and honor and integrity, and even a lot of the man rules, right? Being stoic in the face of adversity when the going gets tough can be very useful and valuable and necessary, but taken to their extremes. That's what we're talking about when we talk about toxic masculinity, or whatever you call it, the way that men have been socialized in this country has absolutely led to the alarming numbers that we're seeing, to criminal behavior, to all kinds of
addiction,
problems,
depression, anxiety,
right,
take your pick.
right, and problems that don't just impact men themselves, but they impact children, families, partners, communities, and all of society.
Right.
And societal problems, again, they require a societal response.
So I think you've unpacked that in a really compelling and beautiful way, and I appreciate you sharing that. So what do you think, what's missing here? When we talk about connecting in a more meaningful way, how do we start to approach this in a societal way?
It's...
I won't hold you to it.
Sure. I go to a lot of meetings and I look at these issues and I take them seriously, and sometimes, or rather often, I come away with the realization that all that is needed is a simple shift of the entire damn paradigm, right?
That's all, right?
Right, yeah. So again, looking at masculinity itself, masculinity is a fluid construct, and it should remain fluid, and it should be expansive. And also, I want to note that we are undoubtedly living in the midst of a long overdue and rightful backlash to patriarchy.
Okay.
And male privilege is real, and gains need to continue to be made in inclusion and diversity and shared power in the workplace, and on and on. And many men are feeling angry, lost, and displaced.
Right. Well, I think what you're saying in different words is this is not a one-size-fits-all solution. We've traditionally looked at men in categories, and you either fit in one or you don't. And for the ones that don't, there's a lot of lost souls out there, and the results of that are catastrophic, it sounds like.
Right. So having a more broad and inclusive understanding of what masculinity can be, right? So Michael Kimmel, the American sociologist, talks about how in American civilization alone, like, we've had 3 conceptualizations of masculinity, starting with what he calls the genteel patriarch, right? And this was the landowner, the head of a family who he worked the land, maybe he had cattle. The urban counterpart of that was the heroic artisan, right? And he knew a trade, and he taught it to others,
Okay.
apprentices and his sons. And of course, there's all kinds of problems with both of these notions of masculinity as related to race and patriarchy, of course. But at the very least, these were conceptions of masculinity that were about contribution to community, and giving back to society.
Right.
And then he talks about how in the post-industrial age of capitalism, we have what he calls the marketplace man, or the self-made man. And this is a masculinity that is measurable. I can pit mine against yours, right? And
Right.
it is manifested in what kind of car I drive, how many women I'm with, how much money I have in my bank account, and how much power I have over other men, right? And within this paradigm, those who have power do not seek to empower those who are weak, but to devour them, right? And it all fits in nicely within a construct in which the global market is God, and your value is existent to the extent that you contribute to this
Right.
market, right? And many men are conditioned to feel entitled to these proofs of their manhood, but few men are actually have the access to attain what they have been conditioned to feel that they are entitled to.
Well, there's not a lot of depth in that narrative. There's a lot of material goods, the social cues that we expect to see from people looking successful. It feels a little like it's a culture that's judge a book by the cover. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a whole lot beneath the surface that we've not even really begun to address here.
Absolutely. And all of it cultivates, it further perpetuates misogyny, patriarchy, homophobia, transphobia, racism, as well as a dog-eat-dog world, where it is every man for himself fighting for the top of the bottom, which is at odds with constructing a world in which where we all do better, we all do better.
Right. When saying we're going to do better doesn't imply we're going to do better. And I think that's the dangerous trap that a lot of us have gotten in. We assume that we'll just change the language and everybody will be better. And I think that's a step, but it's not the step. There's a series of steps. So, in doing the work that you see, and I thank you for beautifully sharing that, how do you find balance in navigating your own obligations? I mean, you wear a lot of hats. How do you do this journey for you?
I have the honor and the pleasure of having great meaning in my work. I really live and breathe this, and it's someone asked me recently what my hobbies are, and I couldn't think of anything beyond the work.
Right.
Because it is like my personal calling is like in perfect alignment with my professional goals, and it's all part of like the conversations around masculinity and male mental health are part of a larger vision for me. And I'm gonna get in speaking about connection, I'm gonna get a little esoteric.
Okay.
That's all right.
Give it to me.
So the good thing about paradigms is they are not reality, right? They're arbitrary. Paradigms and narratives are the way we make sense of reality, but they are not reality itself.
Right.
And Alan Watts, who was the British scholar who was prominent in the countercultural movement of the 1960s, he illustrates that point through talking about how as babies, most babies, well, all babies, when we are born, we don't experience any separation from ourselves and the world around us. We don't even differentiate between ourselves and our caregivers, between our mom or our dad. It is all one magnificent, giant stimulus, right?
Okay.
And there's a Sanskrit word, tatata, which essentially means suchness or thusness or the state of things. And most babies, our first word is da. And apologies to the fathers, that is not their attempt to say dad as much as it is their feeble effort to articulate this sense of awe and wonderment at the majesty around them. Da,
I love it.
da, da.
Right.
But it doesn't take long for us to learn new words, no, and mine, right? And then we engage in a formal process of education that goes on for many years where we learn to further categorize and delineate and classify and organize and other the world around us, which is essential, of course, for our survival as a species, right? We learn not to pet the saber-tooth. But I also think it causes us to lose a fundamental understanding of the human experience and frankly, of reality itself, the connectedness of it all, right? And the fact that there are only 3 particles in the universe, from this cup to the furthest star, protons, neutrons, and electrons. We're all made of the same stuff. We are all just a bunch of energy particles,
Right. And we're all fighting against each other.
Yes, and the I in you is the same as the I in me, right? And
Right.
when you look at a map of the world, right, you see hard, rigid black lines that separate one county from the next, or continents, or countries, or even the land from the sea. But when you're in a plane or on a mountaintop and you rise above the earth, you look down, you'll see there are no hard black lines, right? Those lines, those distinctions are all artifice, right? Mm-hmm. Constructs, just like the differences and the othering that we have done to each other.
Right.
There are real meaningful differences and power differentials between those differences that definitely warrant exploration and deconstruction, but they can be deconstructed.
Right. So when you think about that, I mean, that gives me a lot to think about here. Thank you for getting esoteric with me. I'm an esoteric guy myself. Practically speaking, where's a place to start? Where's one thing we could do different that might make a difference?
I'm gonna kind of close with a story that I think will get to that.
Please.
So I told you in the beginning that when I first started out, I wanted to be a helper. I didn't know what that meant. I would come to find that being a professional helper is not necessarily synonymous to a change agent, which ultimately is what I'm striving to be. But when I was at the Graduate School of Social Work, and it took me, balancing being a father and working multiple jobs, trying to get a degree. It took me a long time to even get on the path, I feel.
Sure.
So by the time I made it to grad school, I was really hoping that in addition to a degree, my exorbitant debt that I was incurring would also provide me with a very clear epiphany of exactly what I was supposed to be doing with my life. And a roadmap. And as I got closer and closer to my graduation date, I had an epiphany that there would be no epiphany.
That you didn't know.
No, if anything, I was more confused than I was when I started.
Right.
And I think it was probably all over my face one day in class. And on the way out of class, one of my professors stopped me. And she said, "Hey, are you okay?" And I say what men say. Yeah, I'm fine. Right. And then she asked again in a way that indicated she actually wanted to know. So I said, actually, no. And then I just explained my frustration around not knowing.
The light at the end of the tunnel is not light.
Right. Or is it a train, right?
Right.
And she smiled knowingly and listened. And then at the end, she said, "Can I offer some advice that has worked for me?" I said, "Yeah, please." She said, "Jason, you just need to choose your horizon and march. Choose a horizon and march and commit to right action every step of the way." Right. And she said, "I promise you that will be hard enough." And those words have stayed with me, and that's what I continue to do. I've chosen my horizon with the full understanding that I will probably never arrive. But it's the horizon.
It's a journey.
Right.
Yeah.
I try to commit to right action along the way, and I'm meeting people along the way who are headed to the same horizon, and we are marching together. And ultimately, that horizon for me is a world in which there's unity across struggles, and people are moving toward collective liberation. And it is a world and a horizon where men are not fighting against one another for their piece of the world, but are rather fighting alongside one another to change it.
I love it. I couldn't say it any better myself. I'm so grateful for this time with you. Before we wrap up, tell me here, what is one thing you're grateful for today?
I'm grateful for those people that I've met along the way that are marching to that same horizon. Ta-Nehisi Coates, he's an African-American writer. He's very prolific. He's written Between the World and Me, We Were 8 Years in Power. He used to write for The Atlantic. But he talks about the black experience in America and the struggle for liberation. And one of the critiques he has had from some of his critics is that he doesn't offer a lot of hope in his writing. And, you read his stuff and you don't feel better having read it. And I heard him address this at a talk, and he said, essentially, first of all, it's not my job to give you hope. Right. And he also said that, he talked about the fact that if you were born black in the 1700s in the South, you could look back 100 years into the lives of your parents and your grandparents, and you would see nothing but bondage and slavery. And you could look 100 years into the future, into the lives of your children and your grandchildren, you'd see the same thing. Where's the hope in that?
Right.
And he said, but luckily, there were people, even back then, who, despite the bleakness, despite the odds, marched. And now, you know, we like struggles take off at higher elevations because of the people who came before us. I'm grateful for those who came before us, and I'm grateful to the people that are still marching today.
That's amazing stuff. I'm so grateful for you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.